Alright, good evening folks, it's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to another Short War video, and today we're getting very big news coming from Sweden, and we're learning that yesterday a Russian aircraft violated Swedish airspace, causing a bit of an international incident, and we have all the information on that today, and we're also hearing as well that in Vovchansk, there are about 400 Russian soldiers holed up in a chemical plant, and now today we're learning that most of those soldiers are surrendering to Ukrainian forces in a very big victory, and we're also hearing as well that we're getting more word from Ukrainian spies and photo evidence of the defenses around the Kerch Bridge, and we're also hearing about the possibility of the bridge being destroyed once again in the future. But with that, we're jumping into our first article of the day, and this one goes to Visegrad 24. And this is by far the biggest story of the day. We're learning that Sweden has announced that a Russian Su-24 tactical bomber violated their airspace south of Gotland yesterday, and it was the first Russian violation of Swedish airspace since 2022, and on Monday, 4 Russian military planes also violated Finnish airspace. And what we're seeing here from Russia is basically a concerted effort to try to test the boundaries of these countries, and Russia has found out, and kind of predictably, that these countries will launch their own aircraft to intercept the Russian aircraft and then send them on their way, and that's basically what occurred. So nothing further than simply running them off, but nonetheless it is an incursion into these countries' airspaces. And in our next post here, which goes to Status 6 Military and Conflict News, we have a statement from the Chief of the Swedish Air Force, Major General Jonas Wickman, and he said that the Russian action is not acceptable, and it shows a lack of respect for our territorial integrity, and we followed the entire process and were there to intervene. And we actually have an actual picture from the jet itself that intercepted the Russians. This is the Su-24M Sukhoi that was intercepted right on the boundary of Sweden's airspace, and this was the one that was run off. So once again, it's good to see that the Swedish ran off this aircraft and did not allow it to violate its airspace and go unanswered, and the Russians did not go any further. But with that, we're moving into our next article here, and this one goes to Visegrad 24, and as I mentioned earlier, up to about 400 Russian soldiers have been encircled by the Ukrainian army in Vovchansk, and the Russians are holed up in the aggregate plant, and the complex consists of around 20 buildings or so, and many of the Russians are wounded and unable to fight. So, as we've mentioned multiple times, the battle for Vovchansk by the Russians is not going well whatsoever. Russia is sustaining massive losses in Vovchansk, and that was only one of the beginning phases to try to make their way toward Kharkiv, and the Russians weren't even able to pull that off, and now they're having such a hard time that they're basically getting slaughtered in Vovchansk, and it is an absolute bloodbath. And in our next post here, we actually have some more information, and we're learning that the Russian soldiers that are holed up are now surrendering after that failed attack on the Vovchansk chemical plant. So I think it's pretty fair to say at this point that the Kharkiv offensive has definitely failed. There's no question about that at this point. The Russians know it's a lost cause, and yet we still hear Putin basically calling and crying out for another offensive on Kharkiv. And, you know, we assume he's bluffing on that because obviously this first one has failed in a very spectacular way. But nonetheless, he could try to get more people and then throw them into the meat grinder once again to see if they can try to plow their way through Vovchansk. But currently, at the moment, the Russians are unsuccessful, and not only that, but it was also a huge failure. But with that, we're moving into our next article here, and this one goes to Null Reports, and we're also getting word of a powerful explosion at a gas storage facility in the suburbs of Saratov, Russia, and fire and smoke are visible from several kilometers away. So let's take a look at the video and see what we have. So as you can see, this is a massive fire at this gas storage facility. We're not sure exactly what caused this fire to break out, but it is a huge fire. Someone was smoking where they shouldn't be smoking very clearly because that fire is raging. And in our next post here from Anton Gerashenko, we learned that once again, it was in the city of Saratov. It was a gas storage facility. And as we saw in the video, there was a column of fire rising from it and smoke was seen from kilometers around. But like I said a moment ago, there is no official information on the cause of the fire, but obviously the locals are reporting hearing an explosion in the area. So we can only assume that this was either Russian incompetence, someone smoked where they weren't supposed to smoke, or it was a Ukrainian saboteur or a partisan that decided to come in here and cause this massive disaster. But anyways, moving on to our next post here, we have one from Nexta, and this one says, Ukrainian spies discover Russian man-portable air defense positions near the Crimean bridge, and this is an actual field operation of Ukrainian spies going to the bridge itself itself and taking photos for further operations, and we can see here that constant surveillance provides a correct understanding of the situation and will allow us to exploit the found vulnerabilities in the Echelon air defense system, and the detected manpad systems will soon become the next target of high-precision Ukrainian missiles, the spies noted, and also showed a photo of the future target. So, as we can see here in the photo, this is the bridge itself, and somehow the Ukrainian spies were able to get on the ground near the bridge, sort of near the construction site, and take photos of these defenses and also the bridge itself. And I'll be kind of honest, I'm kind of shocked the Ukrainians shared this photo right here, because this photo, in my opinion, should have probably been kept secret, because now it's probably known to the Russians that there are Ukrainian spies running around the construction site of the Kerch Bridge, and there they are. They're taking photos of their defenses. So the Ukrainians are just out in the open with it. They're not hiding this fact whatsoever that they have spies running around, and there are the vulnerabilities right there in the Kerch Bridge that are going to be exploited in the future. But with that, we're moving on to our next post here, and this one goes to the Kyiv post. And we can also see in this one that the EU has agreed in principle to start the accession talks with Ukraine and also Moldova as well, and the EU had voted in December to hold talks with Ukraine and Moldova, but needed to decide on a framework for negotiations, and now that framework is finally informally agreed upon on Friday. So while this is very good news indeed, this is good news for the financial prospects of Ukraine and also Moldova as well, but I will say that on the defensive front, the EU is pretty much solely an economic thing. It's not like NATO admission where they get protection by NATO. This is more about securing Ukraine's economic future. This is good news nonetheless, but it's not as good news in my opinion as a potential NATO membership, but we'll just have to wait and see and hold out hope that it will eventually happen. But moving on to our next post here, this one is going to go to Nexta once again, and we're learning as well that Russia's advantage in artillery at the front has decreased to 5-1, says the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. And they said here, this is a statement by the first Deputy Defense Minister Ivan Haveraluk. He says it takes time to load the ships, which then have to cross the Atlantic, but we can already see the results. Russia's artillery superiority was 7-1 at the beginning of the year, and now it's dropped to only 5-1. So just in case you didn't happen to catch the inference there, they're basically saying that as the Western artillery is arriving in mass, the shipments are starting to arrive very rapidly from the West in these artillery supplies, Ukraine is now leveling out the advantage that Russia had when it comes to this artillery advantage. So while 5-1 is still not that great, it's much better than being 7-1, and remember, even at the 7-1 or 5-1 ratio, Ukraine is still winning the war, and also they're still holding off the troops from Vovchansk and also other areas of the front line, which really attests to Ukraine's training and also fighting ability compared to the ill-equipped and poorly trained Russians. But with that, we're moving on to our last post of the day, and this one goes to Nexta as well, and we're also getting some very disturbing analysis from the ISW. The new analysis that's coming out says that Putin sees victory in Ukraine as a prerequisite for waging war with NATO. So, in other words, a first step to actually going to war with the entire NATO alliance as well. And we're also hearing that according to the Institute for the Study of War, the Kremlin regularly feigns interest in negotiations, but at the same time it seeks to maximize territorial gains, and this is evidenced by the offensive operations in the Kharkiv region. And in addition, the experts are convinced that eventually a Russian victory in Ukraine will eliminate the threat of Kyiv as Russia's potential adversary in a war with NATO. So this basically takes us back to the age-old debate. It's been basically going on ever since Russia has been invading Ukraine as to whether or not Putin wants to retake all the Baltic states and also all the former Soviet bloc, or does he simply want to retake Ukraine, and if he took it, that might be the end of it. And based on what we're hearing from the ISW, this is only the beginning. If Putin can secure a victory in Ukraine, it is definitely going to lead to a wider escalation and also a much larger scale war with the West and also the other former Soviet bloc states as well. And not only does the ISW believe this as well, but we're also seeing that the US and also Western allies are preparing in the future for a potential direct conflict with Russia, and we have a lot of troops also on standby in the NATO alliance forces to basically get prepared for Russia to do something crazy and perhaps invade a NATO country or try to attack it from the Russian mainland. So, of course, this is always very disturbing to hear, but we have to be prepared for the worst case scenario, and it seems to me that the West is really wising up to that, and we're starting to get ready for Putin to do something absolutely insane, which is certainly on the horizon. But with that, that is actually our last news post for the day. So I hope you found found today's video informative, and if you have, please press the like button and also subscribe to the channel as well, because that greatly helps us get the news out there, and it also makes us feel really good that y'all like the reporting as well. And if you want to support our channel financially, you can do so on our Patreon page, and the link is in the description below for that, where you can go over there, sign up on Patreon, and help support us financially. And remember, we are almost entirely crowdfunded by the viewers, so that is a humongous help to keep our work going. And once again, thank you all for being Patreon subscribers. And with that, we'll see you all tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on our nightly War News stream, and bye-bye for now.